Hello everyone, my name is Travis and welcome to another Guardian build breakdown video. So today I have a build that technically I guess now you can say it's not truly complete just because of some changes that Bungie has recently made due to some armor swapping exploits. But I will still explain them to you when we get to that point. So without further ado, let's hop into our subclass and we'll go from there. Alright. So, abilities. We have Healing Rift, want to stay alive as long as we can. Burst Glide for the movement. Pocket Singularity because choices are abundant here in our department. And yeah, Grenades because unlike our melee, there actually are other choices, but this is just mainly the one that we're going to stick with. And for good reason. This actually gives us the most benefits compared to the rest, in my opinion. Aspects, we have Chaos Accelerant and Child of the Old Gods. This as a hint, this basically was part of this armor piece at one point, but ever since they did the rework, I think this is actually a better outcome for this subclass, and really allows us to stretch our arms when it comes to this, essentially. Child of the Old Gods, because debuffing is really what we want to do, and so this will help us out in that department. You don't have any needs for Feed the Void, you'll see why in just a moment. So for fragments, Echo of Undermining, you always want to keep your thumb on top of the enemy, so this will keep them down all the time. Echo of Harvest, because when we actually do take them down, then that will produce a Void Breach, and with our armor set up, also create an Orb of Power. So when you defeat weakened targets, it'll create an Orb of Power and a Void Breach. Echo of Reprisal also allows us to gain Super Energy when surrounded by them, which I think surrounded is defined in this case as like 3 or more enemies. So pretty easy to get into. And Echo Starvation, because we have Harvest, Starvation actually benefits big time from this, and this is also the reason why we don't use Feed the Void, because it's right here. Echo Starvation states that picking up a Void Breach or an Orb of Power grants Devour. That's the only reason why you want to use Feed the Void, so since we have Harvest and Starvation, that replaces that aspect. Speaking of subclass and abilities here, our super of choice is actually not going to be neither of the Nova Bombs. I don't think you really need it unless you really just want to play into it. But I actually decided to go with Nova Warp. This is mainly just for funsies at this point. Plus, I mean, you get the teleport, which this thing really does travel when you're teleporting. I tested it out with a friend in Watcher of the Spire. Spire of the Watcher? Yeah, totally. Yeah, Spire of the Watcher. And we I basically just literally went from one end of the map to the other actual end of the map without having any fear of falling off and dying. So kind of crazy how much distance this thing travels. But this is also good for damage resistance too. And this thing actually does take a lot. So I would suggest to run this if you really want to just play around with your enemy while being able to push them back ever so slightly. Alright, weapons. Honestly, weapons are up to you. These are just my suggestions, and I'll actually suggest other things as we get to that point. Chroma Rush, mainly using it because of Wellspring. Basically, kills with this weapon will generate ability energy in general, and this is divided based off of all of your uncharged abilities. So things that you just recently used, this will help to fill that up. We have Tidal, because this is a Void submachine gun, so Void to Void, plus Classy Contender is the main reason why in this case, because Final Blows with this weapon grants class ability energy. This is basically like a highly concentrated version of Wellspring, except just for your class ability. So a really good way to get that up and produce more rifts for your team, as well as you, as well as bringing out more children to basically suck the lives out of your enemies. And of course, we also have Repulsor Brace. Since our enemies are pretty much weakened all the time, why not take advantage of that by using this ability, which getting kills in general against void debuffed enemies will give you an overshield. So always good to have some extra protection. And this can be slotted out, like swapped out with another weapon if you don't want to go down this route, or if you don't have this weapon, because this can only be obtained from Guardian games. So do that as you will. They've also just in recent times given us a scout rifle for our primary that basically does have classy contender as well. But I digress. For a heavy, we have Two-Tailed Fox. This thing is an absolute powerhouse for mid-game content, basically. And because it's first and foremost a void weapon, it takes total advantage of any of the jargon that works with void. So have a debuffed enemy, you can blast them with this, and it'll do one, two, three different types of damage if you have the catalyst, third tail. So basically this will do void first, this will then do solar next, and then with the catalyst it gives it arc for the last. But all that is in two shots. So very useful to have. And I believe the solar also scorches enemies. So you have more than one thing happening at a time. For armor, we have Dynamo. I think you realistically have to be about 15 meters away from the enemy. Use your healing rift in our case, and instantly get some super energy. It reduces the cooldown for your super. Of course, use your grenade, and your grenade will also give you super energy too, as well as an orb of power. And in our case, it may give us like two orbs of power because of our fragments. So as we're picking up those orbs of power, they'll give us armor charges, which if we get three of them, then we can use grenade kickstart, which basically tells us the moment we use our grenade, based off of how many armor charges we have, it'll basically just refund us grenade energy. And to ensure that we can hold as many as we possibly can, I decided to have our charged up for this slot. Basically, there's not much going for the chest, so you can pretty much do anything you want here. I just did this so that way I can have an extra slot to hold orbs of power when we pick them up, therefore giving us one extra armor charge to play with. Put resist mods that are fitting to the content that you're playing as. So if there's solar if you have like a solar threat, then put in solar resistance. If you have void as the threat, then put in harmonic resistance because you're running as a void guardian. So this will basically give you a discounted version of the void resistance. And then of course we have harmonic reserves because we are using a heavy void weapon. I decided to go with harmonic reserves. This is basically in the same vein as like the resistance. This is basically void reserves right now. But if you were to swap this to solar, then this would obviously work for solar. But yeah, really good use to have it so that way you can pick up as much heavy ammo for your weapon as possible and have just that little bit more of a chance to take out your enemy. Since we do have charged up, we're not running stacks on stacks, which is actually really useful if you want to just speed the process up on picking up those armor charges from orbs. But I decided actually to go down the elemental charge route because I think it's better. The stacks on stacks honestly just cost too much, in my opinion. And with what we currently have for our armor mods, it's much more advantageous to go down this route because this fundamentally does the same thing, just in a different way. So when we pick up our void breaches, which like our orbs we'll be producing many of, this will give us a high chance, or as they say, escalating chance, to turn that void breach into a armor charge. So great way for that. And of course, void breaches also give us grenade energy intrinsically. So also really good. We have installation and innervation. Both of these fundamentally do the same thing. When we pick up an orb of power, this will reduce the cooldown for our healing rift in our case and our grenade. When laying our healing rift, by the way, speaking of that, we have Reaper. So basically, lay your healing rift, get a kill with any of our weapons, and that 100% produces an orb of power. Also, when using our healing rift, this will allow us to also reduce the cooldown of our grenade, so we can use it more often. And then for this last one, it's up to you. I use Proximity Ward just in the case that we need to finish an enemy off, so that way we can get that overshield just to survive that big attack. That's why I have this. Otherwise, honestly, you could use whatever you want. You could use powerful attractions if you really want to just collect the orbs and not go out there and die. and or lean into double bomber for that much more energy being returned to you, or should I say lowering your grenade cooldown that much quicker. But I went with this for the extra protection. Honestly, we don't really need it, but it's always nice to have. And if you guys want to use the seasonal artifact, you don't have to, but just complements the build. Use Unto the Breach, which will allow us to produce more Void Breaches, which, to be honest, you're only going to be producing one before the cooldown kicks anyways, but this is good to replace fragments if you want to go down this route. A protective breach will allow us to gain an overshield when picking up our void breaches, which is good because that gives some utilitarian value to our void breaches. And supernova is actually pretty good. So when you pick up a void breach, your next void damage, whatever that may be, whether it's through armor, super abilities, or weapons, whatever the case is, the very next type of damage you do is going to give a weakening pulse. So let's say you use like the funnel web, a void SMG. When it says supernova is ready, which that's what it will say, use the funnel web, and once you get that kill with it, boom, all of a sudden it's going to weaken the enemies around there. And it creates a pretty good radius, so you can also do this too. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. This is how my Guardian looks. I think I pretty much nailed it with this guy. I was actually kind of going for something similar. Like, I was basically going for this build. And speaking of which, actually, let me show you guys what I am rocking in terms of that. We are using Kitsune Mask, or the Hood. Grasp of the Void. This is an ornament for the Controverse holds. The Kitsune Robes, Kitsune Boots, the Wolf's Wood Bond, which I believe is the... This is the... Oh, I think this event just passed to Iron Banner. I think it's Iron Banner, but I could be wrong. For our colors of choice, we have Amethyst Veil. So as you can see, that's what this looks like here, which looks really sharp and kind of accentuates the whole point of being void. So yeah, that's pretty much the build. Name of the game, weaken everything, destroy everything, hold your grenades in for maximum efficacy and damage, and of course, mess around with your opponents through Nova Warp. So thanks again for watching. I will see you guys in the next episode of whatever I decide to do. Oh, and one last thing. If you don't want to run this, because maybe you don't have this or you just don't prefer, and you want damage, go with the Graviton Lance. This thing is an absolute powerhouse now that it's received a 67% damage buff. It's actually quite awesome. And the cosmology perk that it has on there basically count as grenade kills, so also really good in proccing your ashes to assets. But that's my 2 cents on that. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Ta-ta for now.